Hello. My name is Daniel Lever, and I'm from Media Molecule in England, Guildford. And we worked on LittleBigPlanet and LittleBigPlanet 2, which is out soon. Firstly, I want to say a few things about how I'm going to do this lecture. I'd like it to be a very interactive lecture because it's an interactive medium, so therefore I want to hear lots of you guys saying stuff to me as well as me saying stuff to you. So I'll be picking on people if you don't put your hands up or if you don't shout out stuff to me. So you might as well just shout out when you have a question or if you have a concern or anything, and then I'll start picking people at random, and it'll be much more scary for you. So I've called this the Little Big level design because everything in LittleBigPlanet needs to start with Little Big. And this is how we look at design choices and how we build a level in LittleBigPlanet. Here we go. So I'm actually a senior level designer in Media Molecule, which means that I've been there a very long time. I've been there for 5 years now, and I've worked on 2 games with Media Molecule with at most 5 other level designers. It's a very small team. There's only 30 of us in the whole company, so it's more like 35 now actually. But it's a very closely knit company, and we're all very experienced at working in different areas other than our own. So while I'll be talking about level design, you'll see a bit of game design, a bit of art in there as well, and a little bit of everything. And I think it's quite important in a small company to be good at things that you're not just your area. Am I speaking too quickly for you guys, or are you all able to understand me, by the way? Are you all perfect? I've noticed that Swedish people have better English than I do, so I'll continue. Okay, so I thought what I'd do is I'd show you a trailer of the game first, so that if you haven't played LittleBigPlanet, you'll know what I'm going to talk about. I need to turn it up a little bit. Oh, that'll do. Okay, cool. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Okay, so I've set out some objectives for this lecture as well. So I want you guys to, by the end of it, understand 4 points. I want you to become familiar with common AAA level design techniques. Okay. To be able to understand the process of designing a level from white box to completion. Who knows what white box means? Actually, not as many as I thought. Okay, it is actually a common term in the industry. And what white box means is first draft. It's like a first draft, no textures, no art assets, no sound, just simple boxes and simple gameplay chunks. And to understand gameplay flow and player direction in the context of a 2D level, and this is obviously important in LittleBigPlanet because it's a 2D game. It's Many of the same rules apply to 3D environments, so if you're making a 3D platformer or anything similar, these will still apply, but I'm talking in the context of a 2D game. And to be able to reflect on teamwork in level design, I think this is a very important area, which is probably the hardest thing I had to learn when I joined Media Molecule, was how to work well with a team. I think a lot of you would probably have experienced this now because you've worked in a class, but beforehand I worked in mods, which were very much a singular experience. You worked on your own to try and achieve something, and you only ever really had the feedback of playtesting to work with. Not really ideal. So a little bit about me and where I came from. I've worked at Media Molecule for 5 years, and before that I was an estate agent selling houses. So I didn't have what you guys have, which is a fantastic university and course to work with. All I had was what I did in my spare time, which was working on a mod for Half-Life 2. And Half-Life 2 is a great engine because it allowed people to make and design their own user-generated content within an amazingly flexible engine like the Source engine. Once I'd realized that selling houses wasn't for me, I decided that I should get a job which is fun. So I quit my job and I decided to make a portfolio and apply to a bunch of places, and Media Molecule was one of the places. And when I joined Media Molecule, there's only 10 people, and it looked very much like a bedroom. It looked like a small room with some sweaty programmers and a couple of other people in there, but it was really attractive to me. I wanted to work there more than anywhere else because of how it felt. So on with the lecture. So the level design process. LittleBigPlanet is heavily reliant on physics for gameplay. It's actually a really powerful physics engine. Everything that can move in a level moves at all times. So not only what you see on screen is expensive for the PS3 to render, but everything that's happening in the level is happening at all times in every section. So it's a really powerful physics engine to be able to do that at all times. Because of this, we wanted to use physics quite heavily in our gameplay. We wanted to really show it off and show like things tipping over and things tilting and things falling down. It's quite exciting when you see something happen differently every time you play a level. So we really wanted to emphasize that. We chose a 2D environment for ease of readability and player accessibility. Most people who play games these days will be very happy and very comfortable with 3D, but if you're going to make a game for everybody, you need to make sure that everybody can understand it. And sometimes 3D can be a bit daunting for some players. For instance, my mother is a good example. She could actually play Sonic the Hedgehog, but if you gave her Sonic 3D or Mario 64, she'd start panicking because she was given too many options. And it's good for 2D to give people 2 options, left, right, or up and down. It's kind of 4 options, but you get the idea. And 95% of all gameplay occurs in the level design and not the character. And this is something else that's quite important. So let me just put my stopwatch on so I know how much time I've got. This is very important because in many games, the character itself is where the gameplay occurs, as in if you play a shooter or an RPG, most of the time what you do will be within your character, like equipping armor, using skill points, shooting things. Whereas Sackboy can only run, jump and grab, which was not ideal for making a 10-hour game. It was difficult because we realized that the stuff that made some variation and interest for the game would be all in a level design. So it pretty much rested all on our shoulders to make something fun. So I'm going to talk now about how we created that fun stuff, and it wasn't easy. Probably the first 6 months of making the game, I was met with blank stares from our directors as I presented what I thought was fun, and then I quickly realized that what I was presenting was the idea of what's going to be fun, not actually what is fun. So what I was doing is I was saying like, oh, this is where you go into the room and you meet the dragon, and the dragon is going to breathe fire and he's going to do this, and this is how you slay the dragon. But I didn't actually show them how that happened. I got caught up in something that I think a lot of people do, which is they overthink how it's going to look when it's finished and not actually show someone something fun. So to do that, we created Motifs. It's a strange word. I don't know why we call it Motifs. I don't know who came up with it. It might have been someone else other than me, but each piece of gameplay is referred to as a motif. So each chunk of gameplay we create is restricted by the game camera, and that's obviously what you can see on screen at one time. We've got quite a limited range of camera zoom in LittleBigPlanet. It's not a 3D world, so you can't look around, you can't see lots, you can't step back and have a look at something for a bigger picture. You can only see what the designer decides to show you. Therefore, we had to make sure that each of our chunks of gameplay had to fit on one screen, which is it's risky, but at the same time, it allows for great flexibility in how you combine these things. So before you start designing your level, the best thing you can come up with on your gameplay is a theme. And I'm not even talking a visual theme, because that comes later. I'm talking more of a mechanical theme. Perhaps maybe everything's turning, maybe everything's flipping upside down every half a minute, maybe you're looking at magnetism, or maybe looking at low gravity, something like that. And it's important to have a theme, otherwise you might just be hit with something we call blank page syndrome, which is where you sit and you look at a blank page and you think, right, where am I going to start? And if you don't have some kind of direction for the whole team to work with, you're going to end up having some a lot of wasted time when people just stare at the ground and just stare at the air thinking, what should I do? So it's good. Each motif should be isolated and function alone. And this is quite important because initially we were building levels that the whole level was basically one long gameplay motif. And that's okay, but of course if you want to change any part of it, it affects the whole level. And that could be very risky for time and for the whole level in general, because if it turns out that one motif isn't very fun, the whole level isn't very fun and there's nothing you can do about it. So we design each chunk of gameplay to fit on one screen, to be really fun and to be isolated, so that you could, if it turns out it isn't fun, you can just cut it out, or if it is really fun, you can multiply it and copy it a number of times through the level. So we decided at Media Molecule that brainstorming should be done in-game where possible, meaning that as little time as possible should be spent on paper designs. And the reason for this is that when you're making a paper design, you can often imagine it to be a lot more fun and creative than it actually is. You can look at this amazing drawing you've done of a giant wheel of death, and it turns out it's really nothing more than just a very slowly moving wheel in the game. So what we decided to do was, once we had our direction, we would then we'd go off to our little desks and we'd just start building motifs in the game. So luckily LittleBigPlanet is a very flexible building tool as well as a simple 2D game. So we were able to knock up lots of key gameplay chunks very quickly. And this is very important because as you're building these gameplay chunks quickly, you start going off on a tangent, your brain starts to work into other areas and you start coming up with things that you would never have designed on paper just by the way something falls over or the way something goes wrong. I mean, things going wrong is where a lot of our ideas come from actually, which is probably quite tragic. And don't throw away anything at this stage, because even though you might play something and go, oh, this isn't good for the project, or this isn't going to impress anyone, simply showing it to someone else might be enough for them to go, I like what you've done with that, and I can think of a dozen ideas that come off that. I mean, that's one of our Swedish designers, Victor. He's amazing at taking our worst ideas and making them brilliant. He takes like the biggest pile of fail ever and turns it into the best level in the game, which I'm always so impressed with him when he does that. So keep everything and make sure you document it. And if you're going to document something, it's best to document things with screenshots, pictures, not words. A lot of the time when you're reading through a list of gameplay motifs that are just words, you can't remember for the life of you what they are. When you have pictures of each of these little design motifs, it'll all come back to you and you'll understand straight away, that's the big wheel which does this, and this is the rocket cheetah, or whatever. Once you're finished with your motifs, it's time to sort them into themes. Obviously we start off with a theme, but at this stage some of the motifs may have deviated from that theme and go off into other themes, which is fine because it's all good content. Sometimes you start making a level and end up making an entirely different level, but it's okay because in the grand scheme of things it's only going to make the game better. There's no point in throwing stuff away or ignoring stuff just because it doesn't fit what you're doing at the time. I think he's not there at Media Molecule anymore, but one of my old design friends was kind of annoyed me because he kept on throwing away stuff that he'd done that was perfectly good and not show it to anyone because he kept worrying that it wasn't within the theme that we decided at the start, and it was just tons of good stuff being wasted. And finally, time to pick out the set pieces and keep them separately. So I'm going to ask you guys, what is a set piece? Would you understand what that would mean by set piece? And somebody's going to have to say something, or I'm going to pick someone. Okay, you in the red. What is a set piece of gameplay?
Well, really know, but maybe a thing that occurs just in that place.
Yes, that is actually perfect. Oh, go on, you want to add something?
Interactive objects in the settings.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So a bit of both of what you just said there. It's something that would occur pretty much only probably in that one place in the game. And a great example of this is who's played Uncharted 2? Great, a few people. Oh, great! It's a really good game. The bit when the building collapses when the helicopter attacks you, that is a set piece. In fact, most of Uncharted 2 is a set piece. It's something that if you repeat more than once, it's going to lose its effect. It's going to lose its impact. And the important part is that it happens once, and you go, wow. I'll remember that awesome train section forever. So we pick out the set pieces at this stage and we keep them separate from the rest of the motifs. The important part is that you don't overuse these. These are to be kept for once per level, maybe once even per game. Okay. And finally, expect that only a small proportion of your motifs will even make it to the game. Not everything you create will be good, and that's going to be a common theme of this. And while you should be expected to be on your best at all times, sometimes you're not going to be, and sometimes what you create will, in fact, fall short of the mark. But it's okay because, you know, the next day will be good for you, and you've probably created some items which will go in the game, and some aspects which are good. I can move on to cooperative gameplay within LittleBigPlanet, because LittleBigPlanet is a 4-player game. You can play it as 1 player, but we had to make sure that 99% of the entire game could be played with 4 people. This was so that when you said to people, oh, you can play this 4-player, it wouldn't just mean that one person was doing all the fun bits and the other 3 were just following behind, trying to survive. We designed our camera system to make sure that it didn't favour the best player, it would favour the group as a whole. So if one player decided to shoot off and try and, you know, destroy everyone else, they'd be quickly stopped by the screen space or whatever. So importantly, our motifs and our gameplay needed to work well with 4 players. This was really, really frustrating because motifs that don't work with 4 players, as well as 1, will need redesigning or cutting from the game. And this was horrible, especially for me, because I really love single-player stuff. And I'd create some really epic grapple hook section or an awesome minecart section. But if it occurred to me that the other 3 players wouldn't be able to get into this minecart or wouldn't be able to join in the system in the section, it was a waste of time, and it would have to be cut. So it was quite a steep learning curve for me. That's something I was not good at. But however, I did create some areas which only worked with multiple players, and we call these co-op areas. So while the whole game can be played with 4 people, there are some areas of the game which are only completable with 2 or more people, and these are really fun because players love working together if it's a co-op game. You know, it's good to give people the opportunity to say, oh, okay, you go over there and you take the red guy and I'll sort out the blue guy and we'll hopefully win this fight or whatever. I mean, the important part is that both players feel like they have a role in the co-op section. They usually feature puzzles or tense gameplay, and what I mean by tense gameplay is gameplay that's going to make players not have to go fast, but yet be careful. And I think that works very well with 2 people or more people, because it's a bit like the games. Who knows the games when you have a wire loop and you have to move it over like a sensor, and if they touch the, you want to say something? Go on. This is good. Go on.
Yeah,
You're just saying you know about it. Okay. Sorry to pick on you there. Yeah, but these things are great because, you know, it slows people down. It slows the game flow of the whole level. But in these sections, that's what you want. You want people to have to carefully work together. There was a section in the game. I haven't actually asked who has played LittleBigPlanet, by the way. Oh, great. That's really good. Does anyone remember the bit in a Mexico theme where you had to drag bombs very carefully and put them into a minecart? Okay, that was created by my boss, Mark Healy, and it was a real pain. That's what I'd call tense gameplay, but perhaps a little bit too much so. It was excellent because it required one player to very carefully maneuver a bomb which explodes on impact with anything and drop it into the back of a minecart so that another player could then wheel it off to the next section. And of course, if one player decided it would be really funny to jump on the bomb or hit the other player at any time, the bomb would explode, killing everybody, and it would get really tense. But yeah, it's very good for cooperative gameplay, stuff like that. I don't think fast gameplay works so well for cooperative areas. You really want people. There's some great examples in Gears of War of all games, actually, which in which when the players are forced apart and they have to both tackle the same area from a different viewpoint. And they're absolute classic areas for this game. Yeah, I love those bits. Okay. Key to good co-op is that all players feel like they had an important role. So make sure that if you're designing cooperative gameplay in your multiplayer game, that it isn't just a case of one person, does all this fun stuff and the other person just has to step on a button and wait there till it's over, because that'll just make them feel like they were just a paperweight. Generally, 2-player cooperative tends to work better than 3 or 4 players, from what I've seen, simply because you're far more likely to have a friend over to eat pizza and play games, or just log on to online games with one friend than you are with 3 or 4. It's just maths or whatever. But I think the 3 and 4 player areas tended to be frustrating, because if you couldn't get 3 or 4 close friends and you had to work closely with someone to do something very intensive, if you were on the internet, you'd end up getting grief by everybody, and it was just a big mess. I remember I didn't actually get the Platinum Trophy on LittleBigPlanet until about a month ago, when I finally managed to get all of my co-workers to log in with me and do it, because I couldn't get 4 people to work together online. It was really annoying. On completion of these areas, it's also important to award all players with prizes, not just the fastest or best player. And this is another way of looking back at the whole, this game is for everybody. You're going to be playing with people, if you're playing LittleBigPlanet, like your family or your friends who aren't good at games or aren't very good at platformers. And it's really important that you don't just reward the best people. It's kind of different to Call of Duty or other games online, where you can be highly dominated by another player. It's important in these areas just to make sure even the best players get some good stuff, but then the worst players still do get to be involved in the game. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, once you've got your gameplay chunks, how you'd convert them into a level. What we do is we take a bunch of similar motifs and we put them in something called a palette. And a palette is just like it sounds, like an artist's palette it covers all the colours that they'll need, and a designer's palette covers all the gameplay that they'll need. It's really important to have this, I think, because while it's tempting to start afresh with every single day that you come into work, it takes a while to get your mind into the set of, I'm making levels today. So if you come into work and you have a palette, you can look at it and go, oh yeah, I remember what I was doing with this. This is important. I had some really good ideas with this, and then you can start fresh. Actually, another extension of that is that when I'm building a level, before I go home every day, I'll make sure that I only half finish the last thing I was working on. And this is important because I know that the next day, if I just finished that piece before I went home and when I came in the next day, I'd be faced with a brand new day and a brand new challenge, and it wouldn't be very easy to start up in the morning and get stuck in. Instead, I'd half finish what I was doing and say, right, I know exactly what I've got left to do on this piece, but I'm going to do it for tomorrow, leave it for tomorrow morning. Coming into work, you can then sit down, boot up the PS3 and finish off what you're doing, and your mind is already churning on what's next. In addition, your brain will also be thinking about, oh, after this I'm going to do this, while you're finishing off that little piece of gameplay. Very important. When you're building a level, I tend to pick 3 to 5 solid gameplay motifs and begin combining them into what we call a white box, which is what I mentioned earlier. The reason we only pick 3 to 5, it's not a hard rule, it's just a general thing I like to stick to, is because if you pick more than that, you'll end up having a very disjointed and varied level, but at the same time, players will feel a bit lost because they'll be having to learn something new every time they take a new corner. So too many ideas can actually be bad for gameplay. If you have a puzzle game and they've just gone, oh, okay, the red blocks, they'll do this, they explode. And then you say, okay, now here's some green blocks. And they go, okay, green blocks, they grow. Blue blocks, they do this. If you keep chucking different ideas at them, they're going to start tuning out, and then they'll start forgetting what red blocks did. And then when that happens, they're going to not have any fun in your game, which is something that I think is quite annoying about some puzzle games, because they're really good, but then they put too much stuff in. We set out the motifs in order of difficulty to play and complexity to understand. The reason we do this is quite obviously to create, oh, did I cut then? To create a nice difficulty curve. Who knows what a difficulty curve is? What is a difficulty curve?
It's easier in the beginning and it gradually becomes harder.
Perfect. That's perfect. I was going to start clapping for you then, but I thought that's a bit much. Yes, absolutely. So, and the reason we do this is for the following reason. The first time a player will see something, if it's nice and easy to play, they can have fun learning how it works. So if you have a particular crushing piece of gameplay, like a spiked pit that crushes you, if they have little danger with it, they'll feel more likely to experience it and jump in and get stuck in, rather than sit back and go, oh, that looks a bit scary, I'm going to just try and avoid it as best as possible. So if you give them something that's a bit easy to play, they'll be able to focus on learning. Because people always learn better when they're in a comfortable environment. The second time you see that motif, it's got a bit harder, it's become a bit more challenging. The player can then practice what they've learned with the first motif. They can put it to good use and go, oh, okay, this thing moves up and down, I understand that. How about if I try jumping off and then I can, you know, get a bit higher and then I can get over the next section easier. This is important. And the final time you should see it, or maybe the next few times you see this motif, it should be harder, to the point where they feel they've mastered how to do the motif, but it isn't boring because there's plenty of collectibles and interesting things around the gameplay that they can then really push themselves to try and find. And it's good to use risk and reward to let people really be good at the game. Okay, so once you've got your motifs all separately, it's time to start combining them. So taking ones which might not look on paper like they were going to work well together, but then combine them together to make more interesting gameplay. So you can take something like one of my other designer friends, Victor, did, or something that John did, and go, hey, a second, those look really good, and they'd work really well with my robotic dinosaur. That's the kind of thing that you should be doing at this stage, is taking things which look like they shouldn't work together and just trying them out, just seeing what happens if you put them together and see what happens if you put them on top of each other and stuff like that. Because too much repetition will quickly bore the player. I'm very surprised how many games don't understand this, and they'll give you an awesome mechanic at the start of the game, an awesome level design at the start of the game, and then repeat it for 10 levels, and then get surprised that people just didn't quite finish the game, because it's not cool when you go, oh, this is a great rocket system, and then they never introduce anything else. It's important to make sure that if you're gonna use these motifs, just put them with other motifs and just keep it interesting for the player. Okay, I was going to just mention that again, but it's just more about the same of making sure that the players feel good at the game. It's very tempting for designers to make a game that challenges them, but don't forget that the player that's playing it will never have played this game before. They'll never have seen what you've seen. So making a game that makes players who are not used to your game play well is very important, because if they feel good, they're going to be having fun, and they're going to be having fun playing your game. They're going to recommend it to other people, and you're going to make loads of money. Okay, this difficulty curve should exist in the level with respect to the difficulty curve of the game so far. Because another interesting thing is that when we build levels, we don't necessarily build them in the order that you play them as a player. We don't start at the beginning and end at the end. We often will just start on whatever's interesting at the time or whatever we want to try out, and end up making the last level in the game first. Sometimes that is possible. So don't forget, when you're building your level, that it should be of a difficulty which suits that area of the game. It's very hard to do at this stage, but you can get the general difficulty in there. A good example of that is, again, from Uncharted. They started building the train section. Ever know the train section at the end? Uncharted 2? Yeah, a few people. Oh, maybe people didn't get that far. It was really good. There's an amazing sequence where you're on the back of a train heading through the mountains, shooting bad guys and trying to protect yourself from a helicopter that's chasing the train. And the important part was that they started building this first in the game, and they ended up finishing it last. So it actually took the entire project to make this one sequence from a few of the designers. So yeah, they started working on the end of the game first, which is interesting. Okay, tips for good level creation. Use interesting shapes and variety in the height of the level. This is something that I always try and hammer on with, excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink. I always try and hammer into our newer designers or anyone else in the company. It's very easy to build a level that goes from left to right and is flat, because that's generally how you'd build. It's almost methodical to build left to right, and it's almost methodical to build straight, because that's what it's just the easiest way to build. But what that does actually do for the player is decreases the feeling that you're on a journey. It makes you feel like you're traveling in a very predictable path, and it's not cool when you don't get a bit of height or interesting shapes to travel over in your level. Don't forget that as a designer, you are in control of the shapes and the negative space that players will be in. Who knows what negative space means? Good, I can appear like intelligent now and tell you what it means. Negative space is the area around the shapes that you build. So if you build, let's say, a cave, you'll build a bunch of blocks on the floor that look a bit craggy like rock, and you'll build a bunch of stalactites that come down, or is it stalagmites? I can't remember. Stalagmites, is it? Oh, see, I'm not even Swedish and you're better than me at that. The negative space will be all the space which is encapsulated within that. It's basically emptiness, and it's very, very important for making players feel that they're in the place that you want them to be. So if you're building this cave, it's got to feel, you wouldn't build a cave network and not have the roof. And that's where you come in as designers. Artists don't tend to do this. They will take what you've created and they'll build beautiful artwork into this area and make it feel like a real cave, make it look like a real cave. But what your shapes do is make it a cave. And so when you're building a level, don't forget that if you're going to build a factory to have plenty of working mechanisms and make it really feel like a factory. In fact, I'm pretty sure all of you will do that when you're building levels or you're designing stuff, because it's kind of innate for all you creative, magical people to do this. But you'll be surprised how many people will not do that. They'll build flat ground and say, oh, this is going to be a mountainside. And you're like, well, this doesn't look like a mountainside, so I don't really feel like it is. Oh, yeah, I've already spoken about that. Oh, maybe not. When you link your motifs together, it's good to link them in a way that feels like you're in the area that you're trying to be. Okay, so which means that if you are going down into a mine, make sure you use the vertical gameplay pieces at the start, because it means that you feel like you're going down into something. It means you're going under the ground, deeper into the evil cave system. And the reason you do this is because, yeah, those motifs could work anywhere in the level. They'd just be just as fun. But not only are you making the player have fun with what you're doing in the game, but you're also leading them on a journey and helping the narrative of the level. So it's very important how you order your motifs. Coming back to the negative space thing again, the shapes that you use in your white box level are the strongest art a level can have. And obviously this is a personal opinion. I'm sure a lot of you who are artists will be going, what? It's rubbish. But it's kind of true, because if you artists have a wonderful canvas to work with and a lot of the main structure is done for you, you can convert that into it's like a good piece of concept art. You can look at that and go, of course, I can make some really great waterfall here, and I just didn't think about that before. And it really helps you guys to excel. And the important part is, as a designer, you should feel that you should be able to support an artist by giving him something really good to work with. Because generally design is also, in a way, art, because when you're making a level, it has to look like something, and if you use nice, attractive looking shapes, you've made art. It might not have the right textures or the right kind of sound effects or the right level of detail that an artist would put in, but it will still look great. So it's important to bear that in mind. But, oops, do not devote any time to art or decoration at this stage. It will be a waste of time, because this is really, really important, and I'm sure you guys are learning this, and I'm sure your lecturers are telling you this all the time, but if you take something which is actually not a great piece of design, it might just be okay, it might be pretty good, but it's not as good as it could be, and you start applying decoration and art to it, which is really tempting to do. I mean, I do it myself every day, and I think, stop doing that. What you do is you basically polish up something which won't actually be as fun as you think it will be. And all you're doing is wasting your time, because when all the other levels are then brought up to the same standard of art and visual style, you'll be left with a level which isn't as fun as those other levels. And you'll suddenly worry, where did I go wrong? How did I have this level which everybody loved at one point? And you realise that it's because they loved it, because it looked finished, it looked great, and it looked fun to play. So you're much better off having a level which doesn't look good, but plays really well. And then when you finally put that level of art in, or you get your colleague to work on the art, then everyone else in the team will go, wow, this level is 10 times better than I thought it was, and it's even better than last time I played it. Use your cameras to frame gameplay and key puzzle elements. So this isn't so important for 3D games. If you're making a 3D game where you know, the player can look around, it's kind of more difficult to do this. It's very difficult to make sure that the player sees every aspect of a puzzle. So I'm trying to think of a good example in another game. Okay, so if you're playing something like what's the name? It's not Spyro. I keep thinking. Not Jack and Daxter. If you're playing that, they'll tend to have a little bit of a pan around with the camera through a section of gameplay before you get to it. So you can see where you're going. Oh, and this block is important because it's the right color, and so on and so forth. These are the keystones. In LittleBigPlanet, of course, we couldn't do this. We couldn't have a camera which panned around and looked at every area because we didn't have the capabilities back then. So instead, we just needed to make sure that everything that was important to a puzzle was on screen at one time. So we just panned the screen out a little bit, froze it in place. So Sackboy, instead of being followed by the camera, would move around the camera, which is nice. He's moving around the screen rather than being having the screen follow him. And then players could instantly go, oh, wait a second, that thing at the top right there, that's important. That's what we need to be looking at. If you didn't have that, players would never see it, and they'd be running around the area for an hour and making you look really stupid. Because they don't look stupid, you look stupid. Make sure key puzzle solving objects are visible on screen at all times. Oh, I've already just talked about that, but that's basically what I was just saying. Okay, so here's an example of a piece of gameplay which, so I would like to hear people shout out now. What are the first things you notice about this area?
The lever on the right.
Lever on the right. Great, perfect. Who said that? Who's that? Clap for you. Yeah, that's good. Oh, someone actually tried clapping. That's very, very good. I like that. Okay, good. What else do you see?
The exit.
Where is the exit?
On the left.
Right, great. Oh, wait, okay. So, actually, this thing here at the top right is very important. It's a collectible. This is what players will pick up in the game. So it's actually, yeah, it is an exit. There's two exits at the top and left and top right. So there's two ways out of this area. You see the button? You see the button? But the button is very good because actually the button in our game is pretty poor for standing out. Compared to this lever, this button is one of the last things I spotted when I was playing this. It has very dull tones, and even the red, red is usually a great indicative color, such as in Mirror's Edge. If you've played that, they use red and blue as their main focusing for the player. If you look at the white clean glass world, all you see is red drain pipes and red bounce pads and stuff. That's really important, but the red used there isn't too good. Great, so all you've seen here is that on this screen there are important aspects. That is important, and these things at the top are important. So you already have a direction of where to go, and this is because we've used a camera. The standard game camera would have only shown perhaps just the button, perhaps this much, and of course that isn't enough to build a puzzle. Players could have stood there for 10 minutes thinking, how do I get to this button? This is awful. And believe me, when you do focus testing, they will do that. It is crushing to have focus testing. Who knows what focus testing is? Have you experienced anything you've made being focus tested before by players? You've got something to look forward to. When you focus test something, you'll take what you think is perfect level, and you'll present it to 10 or so people, 5 of which will be under 10s, the other 5 will be 16 to 24-year-olds, and they will play it, and they will show you how wrong you were about your level. They will show you that it is possible to get stuck in a room with only one way out. It is possible to get stuck underneath things that you didn't think it was possible to get stuck underneath, and they'll miss that lever. They'll look at the screen and go, oh, right, there's an elephant-shaped cut out there. Maybe I need to go through there somehow, and they will try for 10 minutes. So no matter how hard you try on making things stand out, there's still going to be people that doesn't work on. But this is a pretty good example of what I could find for that. Which comes to my next point, to play test often. So whenever you're building something, it's very important that you don't just think, it's not ready yet, it's not ready, I'm gonna keep making this until I think it's really, really good. It's good to have a good quality bar and think, how can I make this thing really good? But at the same time, unless you get people to play test it early, you're going to start building upon mistakes which you've created at the start. So if you start building a level which is actually not quite there, and you wait for 6 months or however long you want to wait till it's finished, and then hand it over to playtesters going, right, it is done, it is magnificent, play away, and they fail, you're going to be panicking because you only have 2 weeks left to finish this level before the game ships or your deadline, your course deadline, and it isn't good. And you thought, wow, I just didn't see this. I was too close to the project. I was too close to the level. I wasn't able to stand back and go, wait a second, is this bit actually very good? So pretty much as soon as you've built a small chunk of level, just hand the controller to someone else or hand the mouse and keyboard off to someone else and say, could you just try this for me? And don't worry about what they say. I mean, if they come back and go, yeah, not really feeling that, then you just save yourself a lot of time, because your opinion matters, but as somebody who's fresh and not attached to this piece of gameplay you created, they're going to be a lot more reasonable as to whether it's fun or not. So it's important to get playtesting often. Oh, I did 2 points there. When you're building your levels, build them in a modular fashion. Who knows what modular means? Oh, good. Go on in.
Fragmented, so to say.
Yes. So I thought I'd better ask about that. It's kind of a weird word. Build your level in fragments. Obviously, they can be joined so the player can get through, but make sure there's a nice clean cut between each section, because say that somebody plays your level and they love it, every aspect of it, except for, they kind of want the wheel at the start to be near the end. One of the most tragic things is if you built this level in one big piece and then suddenly you need to find a way to cut this piece out and move it, you'll start thinking, that is really difficult. I don't think I agree with what you're saying, Mr. Playtester. I think it's better this way. And of course that isn't good, because you've just ignored some criticism or some feedback in your level in favour of what's easiest to do. So when you're building levels, please try and consider that they should be easy to change, easy to move around. Yeah, good. You guys have already had a lecture on how to direct the player, so I'm not going to go into this in very much detail, because it's a bit boring for you if you've already had this. But using minor collectibles and checkpoints or other comparable things in your game is a great way to lead players when they don't know they're being led. In our game, often players won't understand where to go in an area, but as soon as you put some collectibles in, they'll just follow the main path it's like magic. It's like watching someone. It's like leading a monkey or something. They don't know what they're doing, but they'll just keep picking up the nuts and just going through the level, and they'll end up at the scoreboard and go, "Wait, I had loads of fun." But really, you're just like, "Phew, I managed to make you get through the level." It's like you're communicating with their brain and bypassing their thinking. It's like you're going straight for the clever part there. So you might think I have quite a low opinion of players, but it isn't that. It's just that I've been shown through dozens of playtests that you give them more credit than they deserve, I think, when they're playing your game. I seem like a real bastard, actually. I should probably be careful. Lighting and contrasting colours are another great way, but subtle way to direct players. As you see, that the lever in the last scene was yellow, and there's a reason it was yellow, is because it stands out in almost every scene other than big yellow levels, which we don't tend to make many of. Yeah, and of course lighting. I was just hearing this morning about Alan Wake, which is a great game which uses lighting to direct people through a level, because of course you feel more comfortable heading towards light, and as human beings we like to be in light. So if you use lighting, it's a great way to drive people through a level. Okay, so this is another area of the same level. I tried to stick to the same level so that you wouldn't pay attention to the art and the art treatment, because that is important, but I wanted you to look at the shapes used and things like that. So in this area we have the yellow lever again. The yellow lever is important. And the brown checkpoint, well, not very well lit in this area. I probably would have put a light there if I'd done it now, but hey, that's hindsight. And of course the prize bubbles, points bubbles. These things are little colourful objects, and they've got a brightly coloured, glowing, throbbing centre, so they try and draw your attention to it. These things all basically drive the player to the top right. Once they've got to the top right and pull the lever, then suddenly the other prize bubbles and the same aspects again, the yellow lever, the inactive checkpoint, the points bubbles, they're all still there, and they were always there in the scene before, but if you probably didn't notice them there before. So let's go back. This is useless. There we go. Yeah, they were there before, but the camera didn't show you, and it wasn't as important as what was the immediate challenge. But now, of course, they lead you in the opposite direction, and the player will then, without even thinking, just start going left. It wouldn't even matter if there was a gap there. It's likely they'd still head left anyway, because that's where everything is trying to lead them. Okay, so